I want to maybe just preview for you 5 of the most important things that I think this next Congress has to take on if we're going to get not just this economy going again from a national perspective, but if we're going to participate in that recovery at the pace that we want to here in Connecticut. So let me sort of tease out these 5 ideas for you, and maybe there'll be some food for thought for you, and then we can spend a few minutes in conversation and questions and answer. If you did see the debate yesterday morning, you saw that we spent a lot of time talking about taxes. And frankly, I think that the most important conversation about taxes when it comes to how we're going to grow our economy is lost in the very simplistic conversation that often happens when you're talking about setting rates. A lot of the debate yesterday morning was about, my belief that we should extend the Bush tax cuts for 99% of Americans, but that we should ask those who are at the very top of the income spectrum to pay a little bit more, to go back to Clinton-era tax rates and to use that money to invest in our schools and our communities and pay down our debt. Linda McMahon believes that we should extend those tax cuts for the very wealthy. That's a disagreement, and it's an important disagreement in this race. But the opportunity when we talk about taxes is not just in resetting rates, it's in resetting the foundation of our tax code. It's starting to have a much broader conversation about a tax code that has just become overly complicated for individuals, but in particular for businesses. It's been small and medium-sized businesses that have come to bear the burden of paying business taxes at a state, but particularly at a federal level, because if you don't have an accounting office that's big enough to find your way around the code, if you don't have enough major losses to offset your gains, you end up paying the rate that's listed on the form rather than the rate that a lot of major companies are paying today. And those major companies are coming to Congress saying that they want a simpler code in which the base is broadened and the rate is lowered. And that last part's really important, because when it comes to business taxes, when it comes to the corporate tax code, we can't succeed as a country if we continue to have the highest corporate tax code in the nation. And so our conversation has to be about simplifying the tax code, lowering the rate, particularly with respect to business taxes, and then maybe even having the guts to step back and have a conversation about what we tax and what we don't tax. Why do we tax labor at the rate that we do today, disadvantaging exports that leave this country? Why don't we tax other things that we may not want as a country, like pollution? We need to have a broader conversation about the foundation of our tax system as well, because a different tax code that incentivizes growth maybe will do more than anything else to propel this economy going forward. So the difference between McMahon and I think is twofold. One, I want a broader conversation about how to reform our tax code to promote growth. And two, I think that we should focus tax cuts on the middle class, because ultimately those are the people that are going to go take that money and spend it in our economy to create jobs in the main streets and the retail shops of Hartford, West Hartford, East Hartford, and Wethersfield. Second, let's have a particular focus, both with respect to the tax code, but also in other areas, on manufacturing. We can't continue to just build a retail service-based economy, because if you're just increasing the capacity to sell to yourself, you're not really growing as a nation. We've got to become an export-based economy, and that only happens by supporting manufacturing. And there are lessons to be had here. Germany is a country that is growing and is prospering because it has become an export-based economy. It doesn't have wage rates or labor rates that are any less than this country. It doesn't have environmental laws that are any less stringent, but it has found a way to make real investments in its manufacturing sector so that it's selling to the world in a way that this country should be able to. As you've heard me say before, I think this starts with the federal government making a decision that when our taxpayer dollars go to Washington, that they get used to buy things for the federal government. That's the Buy America law today that is shipping millions of jobs overseas because we aren't strict enough in using government dollars to purchase things from U.S. companies. And so I've founded something called the Buy America Caucus, which is not designed to erect trade barriers around this country. I don't believe in that, but what I do believe in is saying that the federal government should be spending money here at home. And then it also does flow into tax policy. Our tax structure should be one that gives tax breaks to companies that are resourcing jobs back to the United States rather than giving tax breaks to companies that are shipping them overseas. Which then leads to a conversation about the third area, which is infrastructure. If you're going to have an export-based economy, then you have to be able to get people and goods from the place that you're making them to the port of export. And if you're going to be a 21st century economy, then you have to have a modern system of roads and bridges. We don't have that today. When you fly into LaGuardia, it feels like you're flying into a third world nation. That's not okay. When you get on the road to come from LaGuardia up to Connecticut, depending on the day and the time, it can take you an hour or it can take you 3 hours. And as Governor Malloy will tell you, in the aftermath of September 11th, when a lot of companies were unfortunately looking at leaving New York, they said loud and clear to Connecticut that because they couldn't get here, they weren't going to locate here. And so if we don't figure out as a state, but also as a nation, that our failure to invest in high-speed rail, it's so sad when I sort of read my son is a big fan of trains and locomotives, like every kid is, and every book that talks about trains and locomotives has the picture of the bullet train. And I can't show my son a bullet train. I can't bring him to true high-speed rail anywhere in the United States. To him, they're all sort of fiction and fantasy because they exist overseas and not in this country. Why not? Because we haven't made the investment. It's an investment that grows jobs. And from this state's perspective, it's a moneymaker. For every dollar that we send the federal government as a state in transportation taxes, we get $1.60 back. So, now, I don't claim that that's the rate of return on all of our tax money when it comes to what we send to Washington and what we get back. But when it comes to transportation, if we're investing in it, then we're getting back more than our money's worth. Which leads to the fourth issue. Transportation investment specifically benefits Connecticut because we clearly benefit by unlocking the pathways to the great economic drivers of Boston and New York. But we also benefit more so than other states when we invest in education. This country is not the cheapest place to make a widget in the world, and this state is not the cheapest state in the nation to make a widget, but we have to be the smartest. We have to be the most innovative and the most productive. And so when you're investing in education from a federal standpoint, you're investing in Connecticut. I just came from a manufacturer in Meriden called Jonah Laboratories. And Jonah Laboratories is succeeding, yes, because of the quality of the product they make, but because they've made an enormous investment in their R&D. They're creating rubber composites that are allowing them to beat other lower cost countries and manufacturers around the world, but they need chemists. They need chemists, and we're not producing chemists at a rate that would allow us to do this kind of advanced manufacturing. And so when I talk about, for instance, not renewing the Bush tax cuts for the very wealthy, I say this. I say take half of that money and pay down the debt, and then take the other half of that money and plow it into making college more affordable. It's not all right that college is 300 times more expensive than it was just in 1980. It's not okay that this country, which used to lead the world in the number of 25-year-olds with college degrees, today is number 6. We're going the wrong way in terms of the education levels, particularly on a graduate degree perspective. And there are a lot of things that solve that, but reorienting money towards education is one of them. And so here's the last of the 5 that I teased for you. Let's also have the courage to figure out what the next great economies and industries are going to be. And there is just no doubt that over the next 10 to 20 years, some country in this world is going to capture millions of jobs in clean energy and renewable energy. And every year that the United States throws up its hands and decides that it is not going to take steps to create a domestic market for renewable energy is another year that those jobs are located in Germany or France or Korea or Japan or China. those countries are making massive investments in domestic purchasing of renewable energy sources, not just because they want to green their nation, but because they know that if there's a market there, then the manufacturers will be there. And once again, Germany's a great example of this. Why are the biggest wind and solar companies making things in Germany? Well, because they're selling into that market due to their feed-in tariff. Great example here in Connecticut, a company that John Larson talks about all the time, that I talk about all the time, out in Danbury and Torrington, Fuel Cell Energy. They're making, I think they are the biggest fuel cell company in the world right now, or certainly amongst the top few, and yet they're selling 70% of their product to Korea. And what they are very fearful of is that Korea at some point is going to say to that company, which employs hundreds of people here in the state, that if you don't start diversifying your market, if we continue to be 70% of your marketplace, then we want you to move those 300 jobs here. And that's Korea's strategy. That's China's strategy. That's Germany's strategy. Create the domestic market, and you will have the manufacturing base. You will have the R&D base. So it's why I did support the Waxman-Markey bill that would create a domestic market in a way that does not exist today for those products. There are 20, 50, 100 more ideas, positive ideas, that could get this economy moving at the rate we need it to be moving again. But I wanted to throw those 5 out for you. Simplify the tax code, invest tax cuts in the right places, support manufacturing, and have our federal government practice what it preaches. Invest in infrastructure, which here in Connecticut can have a transformative impact. Understand that education is our salvation as a nation as we try to compete globally, and have the guts and the courage for the government to help lead us to the next wave of economies and industries that are growing across the globe.